in the last couple of weeks, me and this Kaiser Brewing hat, thanks Jonathan, kind of created a little bit of a stir. I'm going to mess up my hair again for this service. For those of you who you're not on social media, you're not on Facebook, I posted a video recounting an incident that happened to me and my wife, and my son, and my daughter-in-law at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse in Portland. Who likes some Ruth's Chris? Have you guys been there? Their steak is off the hook, and when you get a lobster tail with that, it's really, really good. Well, so let me tell you what happened. So Charlene and I, we took my son Rue and his wife Taylor to go see Boys to Men. For those of you who do not know who they are, I feel very bad for you. They are a R&B group from the 90s. They are just phenomenal, and they were doing a concert along with the Oregon Symphony. It was fantastic. This would be the fourth time. It was the fourth time that I saw them. But anyway, it was a Christmas present for my son and my daughter-in-law that we were going to make good on. We were going to include dinner with that at Ruth's Chris because they really enjoy that place. Well, in preparation for that, Charlene checked their website to make reservations. Well, when she did that, she saw that they actually have a dress code there. Now, to be specific, I really want you to take note of this, because I caught some flack about this. I want you to see their words. Okay? They say, because some of our locations vary slightly on dress code, please check with your local Ruth's Chris to just make sure that they are, just to determine whether or not they're super strict on that or not. And one of their rules was that you can't wear a hat. Well, that week I didn't take the time to go and get my hair cut. One thing that, I've got a comment card already. Well, why didn't you just take off your hat and run your fingers through it? Man, when my hair is long, it's just a hot mess. So I just put a hat over it. Okay, so my attire for that evening for the Boys to Men concert consisted of a ball cap. Okay, it's Boys to Men. Boys is spelled with the Z, so it's appropriate attire for the concert. Okay. So I did what the website suggested, and I called our local Ruth's Chris to ask them, how strict are you on the whole wearing a hat policy? And I called them, and the lady who answered the phone said, well, we do have that rule, but we're not really, really strict about it. If you really feel like you need to wear the hat, then go ahead and come on in. That's what she told me. Now, some people say, well, you should have asked for a manager. What did you want me to say? Hey, well, I don't actually believe you. Can I talk to your manager? Who does that? Not me. So I just believed the young lady. And then when we got to the restaurant, I asked again 2 times. I asked the young lady, hey, I'm the gentleman who called us a little bit ago about the dress code, the hat. Do you need me to talk to a manager? No, I'm going to go ahead and seat you. Okay, sat us down. They serve us our water, give us our menus, we're drinking water. I see what I want to order. Same thing that I always do is steak and the lobster. Okay. But then, as I thought they were going to come and take our order, it wasn't. It was the manager. And he said, sir, I need to ask you to remove your hat. I said, well, I called and then checked with your hostess, and she said that wasn't a big thing. He goes, well, it is. And if you don't remove your hat, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Well, that wasn't going to happen. Okay. But I wasn't mean about it. I was not disrespectful. That's their rules. Hey, I go to the Magic Castle in Hollywood sometimes. They require you got to wear a jacket and a tie. Well, guess what I wear when I go to the Magic Castle? A jacket and a tie, because I understand dress codes. I was trying to respect that. But I said, I'm not going to remove my hat. And so he said, well, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. And so we respectfully got up and we walked out of the restaurant it felt like everybody staring at us. I was like, what a goof. And I'll tell you what, I have never felt in my life the way that I did when I had to walk out that restaurant with my wife and my son and my daughter-in-law. It was incredibly embarrassing, feeling like I was an outcast because I was wearing a hat. Here's the thing, when I was growing up, I know what it's like to be called a wetback and stuff like that. I grew up with that kind of nonsense. Okay? So I kind of know what it is to experience that. But I've never really felt what it must be like to be discriminated against. For just a moment, I experienced just a smidgen, just a glimmer of what it must have been like for our African-American friends who were made to sit in a different side of the restaurant because of the color of their skin. Just a glimmer. But I mean, that was a very real sense that I had in that moment. It was embarrassing. So whatever, again, we left respectfully. We went over to a place called the Jackrabbit, which is fantastic, and they do allow you to wear hats there. Boys to men were awesome as always. But the evening was tainted because of that particular incident. And so finally, as me and Charlene were leaving, we're like, man, we got to go and say something. Now, we knew that the parking garage closed at 10:30. It was like 10:12. And like, man, we don't have a lot of time, but we made our way over to the restaurant, not to rip the manager a new one, but to explain the situation and how embarrassing it was so that it wouldn't happen again to somebody else. The manager was really nice. He understood where we were coming from. He was apologetic. It was a very friendly, fruitful conversation. He even gave us 2 free appetizers to come back. He said, will you come back? I said, I will come back. And then I jokingly said, and I'll come back, I won't wear a hat, right? So it was a really great conversation. Okay, so that's the story. And I posted that on Facebook. And what astounded me was the response that I got from folks. People implying that I was somewhat ignorant or being rebellious or disrespectful for not removing my hat when I was asked to. Why didn't you just remove your hat? Well, because my hair looked jacked up, and I didn't want to look like an idiot. Sorry, sue me. I wasn't going to do it. I said, don't you know how disrespectful it is to wear a hat in a restaurant? Well, no. I grew up in the hood. We would go to the Sizzler, my brother's pants sagging down to his ankles. No, we didn't know nothing about that. Come on, give me a break. So, no, I didn't know. But guess what? I did some research this week to determine where did that even come from, this rule to remove your hats? Where? Because I guarantee you ask some of the people who hold so tightly to that, ask them. Because we've always done it. Is that a good reason to do things? No, please. But I did some research to determine where that comes from. You know where it comes from? At least what Wikipedia says, and there's been another couple of websites who affirmed it. But it comes from back in the days when a knight would remove his helmet and in order to, in the presence of a king, demonstrate this sense of vulnerability. Like, you could smoke me right now, but here I am vulnerable removing my helmet. A 1,000-year-old thing made its way into culture, and now we kind of just always have done it, and we do that. Now listen, I do understand how some folks who are, particularly those who've served in the military, why they hold to that. It's kind of interesting because as I considered my thoughts on this, it's interesting because while I didn't want to remove my hat there in Ruth's Chris, if I was at a Hops game and I happened to be wearing this cap, my Kaiser Brewing cap, Tinoco Loco, that if they played the national anthem, I would feel inclined to remove my hat. Why is that? Well, partly because I think everybody's face forward paying attention to the flag and not my jacked up hair. Maybe part of that, but more than that is because I have a particular respect for our country and I'm patriotic that way. And so I would say my hair looks jacked up, but I don't care. And this is America. But now let me put it back on, okay, because I'm videotaping this. All right? But isn't that weird? Like, what a double standard I have, even with regard to this rule. Okay, here's the whole point in this, right? Is that we all have certain convictions and customs and traditions that we adhere to and that we cultivate in our lives and maybe in our family dynamic, in our homes. Man, that is fine. So you take off your hat when you're eating dinner at your house. That's awesome. If I come to your house for dinner, let me know in advance, but I will come there and I'm going to honor that and I'll take off my hat or I'll come without one. It's awesome. Your house, your rules, I totally get that. See, but here's where I think it becomes a problem, is when we start enforcing our own personal convictions and customs on everyone else, it inevitably leads to all sorts of problems, like in the case of Ruth's Chris, who, because they are upholding and enforcing this social custom of removing your hat when you come into a restaurant, it created a distinction between those who don't wear hats and those who do wear hats. And because on that particular day I chose to wear a hat and was asked to leave, I was made to be somewhat of an outcast. I was cast out of Ruth's Chris. But again, their house, their rules. Your house, your rules. They had the right to do that. Whether I like it or not, that's their business. Okay, but what does any of this have to do with church? I think it has a lot to do with church, because throughout church history, and even up till now, there are many churches across this nation and around the world who enforce certain customs and certain practices and certain beliefs that are unnecessarily restrictive. I'm just going to give you a few examples, and many of you in this place, particularly those of you from the older generation who are going to see these and go, yeah, totally, we live that. But you know that there's some churches right now who will not allow a drum set on their stage. Forget about it. Even modern music, the way that we have here, no, it's either hymnals or forget about it. You know that there's some churches that won't allow their women to wear makeup. Imagine that. If you were asked, oh, sorry, ma'am, we don't allow makeup. Can you remove your makeup right now? We have a restroom, a powder room in there. Remove your makeup. Forget it. You'd say, no, I'm not following that rule. But they do that all over the place. There's some churches who they don't believe that it's okay for you to eat pork and shrimp. That's horrible. Think of lobster would fall into that category. Like, why would you? And I almost got duped into believing that. I had a friend who was of that denomination, and he had me nearly convinced, almost this close to being convinced that from the Bible, there's actual merit in that belief. Thank you, Jesus, that I got delivered from that, because I love some shrimp. There's certain denominations that still believe that we should adhere to the Jewish festivals and all of that stuff. So anyway, you get the point. A lot of that kind of stuff. And in some cases, people's religious convictions and beliefs and personal preferences have actually been made into laws. I talked about this about 4 years ago. They called them blue laws. They're called Sunday laws. They're these restrictions that they've placed on certain activities in order to promote worship on Sunday mornings. Let me show you one of these. Listen to this. Some states still have a ban on Sunday hunting. How many hunters do we have in here? Wow. You should have seen the 8 o'clock service. All the men and the women raised their hands. They were all like, what is this? Tell us more. Okay, well, let me tell you. Here's this law. This is still, they just abolished this law in Alabama back in 2017, but it's still in effect in Massachusetts, Maine, Pennsylvania, Delaware. Listen to this. Any person who engages in shooting, hunting, gaming, card playing, racing, where's Greg at? Oh man, racing? Yeah, wow. On Sunday shall be fined not less than $10 and no more than $100, and may also be imprisoned in the county jail or sentenced to hard labor for the county for not more than 3 months. That is on the books. Look it up, Google it. What if we impose that here? Wouldn't that be awesome? Church attendance during hunting season would go up. Except it wouldn't, because the fellas would say, forget that noise, I'm going hunting. Some of you guys would be locked up in county during hunting season if you were over here in these places. Okay, so now, some of these blue laws are obviously silly. They're outrageous and they're laughable in many cases. But here's the thing, though. There are extreme cases where this enforcement of man-made rules leads to really sad stories like this one here. Listen to this 90-year-old woman attending this church, a Baptist church, for 50 years because she stopped tithing. Why? Because she wanted to, not because she fell ill. Okay, well, when she stopped tithing, they sent her a letter saying that you are no longer a member of this church. Wow. And her nephew, you can watch the news clip, Google it. Her nephew's like, she invested her time and energy and money in building that church for the last 50 years. And they give her the boot. It's a really, really sad and hurtful, mean thing. And she's not the only one. That's happened to another young lady in Florida. Same thing happened. So it's not just an isolated incident. Believe it. It's happening all over the place. And that's so messed up. And here's the thing. If I have anything to do with it, Old Town Church is going to be a place of freedom from rule-based religion. Thank you very much for that. Amen. Amen. Right. Now look, I want you to hear me loud and clear, because I guarantee you somebody's saying, oh, so we can do whatever we want? Always. Always, always, always. Somebody is going to hear me saying that. So let me make it very, very clear. I'm going to put the scripture up here on the screen, even in the King James Version form. Listen. So what should we say then? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? God forbid. How shall we that are dead to sin live any longer therein? Man, I am not talking about some unbiblical freedom to do whatever it is that we want, to go and do things that we know are blatantly sinful, committing adultery, hating people, robbing folks, harboring resentment toward people. I'm not talking about that. People hear me talk about freedom and immediately they think that I'm giving people some license to sin, as though people need a license to sin. They do it without a license all day, every day. Lord have mercy. See, and what I'm talking about here, let's not make it the thing about sinning. I'm talking about things that are neither good nor bad. Hey, can I vape? Is there a thing in the Bible? There's nothing about vaping in the Bible. Look it up, I'll guarantee you. See, there's a lot of gray areas. We got to be very careful when it comes to those kind of things. See, I'm talking about those things that are neither good or bad. They're simply traditions. They are personal convictions that each of us have. And the danger is when we begin to enforce personal convictions onto someone else, imposing on their freedom. That's when it becomes a bad thing. And I'll tell you what, Jesus was fiercely, very fiercely opposed to those kind of religious people who would go around doing that. Could give you a bunch of examples. I'm going to give you one and a half. Look at this. This is Matthew chapter 15, verses 2 through 6. Now, the context is that the disciples are eating bread and they hadn't ceremonially washed their hands. And so the Pharisees see that and they come in for the kill. So they say to Jesus, why do your disciples ignore the traditions of our elders? For example, they don't take off their hats before they sit down to eat. Are you thinking? I just want to make sure you're listening. So why do your disciples ignore the traditions of our elders? For example, they don't ceremonially wash their hands before they eat bread. Listen, there are several times when I'm in the restroom, okay? I'm not going to say anything more than that, baby. Listen, my daughter's going, I'm just saying. And you're washing your hands, and then you hear somebody in the stall, and you're rinsing and you're toweling, and you see the dude come out and walk right past you out the door, and you go, hey, nasty. And he's wearing his chef's coat, and oh. I'm just kidding, that's really nasty. And it says Connor on it. I'm just kidding. Anyway, you're like, that's nasty. Okay, so is washing your hands a pretty good societal norm to adhere to? Yeah, I think so. Nasty. Okay, but listen, they said, so why do your disciples ignore the traditions of our elders? For example, they don't ceremonially wash their hands before they eat bread. Well, Jesus answered, and why do you ignore the commandment of God? Because of your traditions. Jesus is about to hit them really hard. Oh, you want to talk about following rules? Let's talk about following rules, gentlemen. Look at Jesus, man. Jesus answered, and why do you ignore the commandment of God? Because of your traditions. Didn't God say, honor your father and mother? And that whoever abuses or insults his father or mother must be put to death. So he's laying out here's a hard rule, and listen to the consequence for not obeying the rule. You want to talk about that, he's saying? Oh, Jesus is so awesome. And he said, but look, in light of that, you go and teach that it's okay, it's permissible to say to your parents, when they're in financial need, you go and say to them, well, whatever gift you would have received from me, financial gift, I have to keep for myself since I dedicated it as an offering to God. They're trying to spiritualize their sin and excuse it. And he says, that doesn't honor your father or mother. And here's his point. You have elevated your tradition above the words of God. Wow. Now see, to some folks, particularly the ones who are coming at me through all sides this week, To some folks, that might sound like Jesus was making a big deal out of nothing, a mountain out of a molehill. Like, Jesus, just tell your boys to wash their hands. Come on, just don't make a fuss about it. Don't be a stumbling block to those religious people. And you don't want to be a stumbling block and say something about it. Just, people have a huge misunderstanding of what that even means to be a stumbling block. Really search that out. People, man. Okay, let me go on. It sounds like he's making a big deal out of nothing, but there's another incident where Jesus is being confronted by the Pharisees. This time it was because his disciples were working on the Sabbath. What was it that they were doing? They're working. They had plucked some wheat because they're hungry to eat, and they had to run the wheat between their hands like this to separate the wheat from the chaff and get the little kernel out. That's working. And so they come at Jesus going, oh, so now you want to allow your disciples to work on the Sabbath? Wow. First, they're nasty because they're doing it with their nasty hands that they didn't wash. Furthermore, they're breaking their Sabbath rule. And Jesus, man, he lays into them, and then he says this. This is Matthew chapter 12, verses 6 and 8. He's saying, you don't think it's a big deal. But I'm telling you, there's far more at stake here than religion. There's much more than just an issue about whether or not you're wearing a hat or not, or whether you wash your hands or not, or any other rule. There's far more at stake here than religion. If you had any idea what this scripture meant when God said this, I prefer a flexible heart to an inflexible ritual, you wouldn't be nitpicking like this. He's talking about the inflexibility of people. Well, we just have always done it that way. Isn't that a good impression? Like, what? Where does that come from? Because that's how they sound to me sometimes. We've just always done it that way. Well, have you considered the why behind? Well, no. We just always done it that way. Okay, well. Man, it just makes me, it's no wonder Jesus just came at those people. You whitewashed tombs. He would just, I prefer, he says, a flexible heart to an inflexible ritual. You wouldn't be nitpicking like this. So what he's telling these Pharisees, he's like, man, you guys are so concerned about this rule here. Let's really examine this thing. Let's talk about your convictions for a minute. Let's talk about how much you are or aren't adhering to your own rules or the commandments of God. Let's really talk about it. It was interesting because some of the people who were coming at me on Facebook and emailing me who were so up in arms about this thing, who were so concerned about whether or not I was honoring God by the removal of my hat or honoring others by the removal of my hat. They had this firm conviction about reverencing God. And yet, man, I know these people. Unfortunately, I know too much about how they're living. So what I could see is this reverence that they have for the Lord and to honor him. Well, that hasn't translated into other areas of your life. So why are you getting crazy about this hat thing? You should probably examine this thing in your life first. Well, that's really mean. Yeah, but that's really true. Like, if you're tripping about the hat, how about you fill in the blank about what it is that you're doing? I'm not even going to go there because I'm just going to back off of that. That's enough there with that. Jesus was like that with these religious type folks, and the Apostle Paul was like that. Listen to this is the Apostle Paul, Colossians chapter 2, verse 20 through 23, and you'll be glad that I'm going to start to wrap it up here. Now, Paul is talking about our freedom that we have in Christ. We have freedom. I don't want to explain this too much, but who needs rules and regulation specific rules? Kids. Baby, don't do that. I'll make sure you brush your teeth. Oh, it's time for bed. You got to do this. Did you finish your homework? Little kids do that. But then you want them to grow to the point where they have their own understanding of how it is that they walk. And it's a very similar thing in our spiritual walk, sure. That's why it describes in Galatians chapter 3, the law, it says, is a schoolmaster. Rules, schoolmaster that lead us to Christ. And then you meet Christ, and now there's a freedom. He's in you. And his Holy Spirit begins to tell you things. He'll convict you of things that he's not going to convict this person of. So kids are the ones who need rules. That's why this is about growing us up. And let's get past the rule-keeping stuff. So Paul is expressing that here in this passage about freedom. He says, look, don't retreat back to being bullied, because religious people can be very bullying. Well, we'll just leave and we'll take our tithes with us. Okay, well, don't let the door. Okay, hold on. Because that's a bullying tactic. We'll just leave and we'll take our tithes and offerings. And you know what churches do? Okay. I won't say nothing about it. Lord, please. Don't retreat back to being bullied by the standards. We're going to put the 8 a.m. service, fellas, online, not this one. All right. Don't retreat back to being bullied by the standards and opinions of religion. For example, there's strict requirements saying you can't associate with that person, or don't eat that, or you can't touch that, or oh, you don't watch that. It's PG-13 or maybe worse. Don't drink that. Don't wear that. These are the doctrines of men and corrupt customs that are worthless to help you spiritually. Worthless to help you spiritually. Because though they may appear to possess the promise of wisdom in their submission to God through the deprivation of their physical bodies, again, restraining ourselves from doing this, that, or the other, it's actually nothing more than empty rules rooted in religious rituals and sometimes societal customs. Wow. And the Pharisees, I don't think in every case were intending to be the jerks that they sometimes were. I really don't think that was always their intent. I really believe that they thought they were serving God and somehow defending his holiness by making up these rules that they thought would help bring people closer to God. But all it did was put a burden on them that was too heavy to carry. And in many cases, it created a distinction between them as the religious people who were so holy and, whatever, and those who they felt they just didn't measure up to the standards that they were imposing, to their man-made rules. And think about how hurtful that can be. I try to follow up and find out whatever happened to that 90-year-old woman who was asked to leave that church. But imagine how hurtful to have spent 50 years there at a church. And from what her nephew said, man, she poured so much money into that place over those 50 years. And then they're near the end of her life at 90. She's asked to leave the church. Think of how hurtful and harmful those dumb rules can be to people. Jennifer was talking to me about how her grandparents, and she told me I can share this, that they were essentially asked to leave their church because of their divorce. How many of you have heard about that happening? You know that's true. Made to feel like you're some kind of second-class citizen because you were divorced? That makes me just angry. That can destroy somebody's faith. They'll say, I'm never going back there again. When I was I got to kind of wrap this up here. But I believe I discovered this in my staff as we were talking about this issue. The reason why I feel so passionate about this is because I know what it feels like to be on the receiving end of that. When my brother Bobby died, and I've shared this with you, I'm not going to get all into it, okay? When my brother Bobby died, my mom sent us to a youth group, hoping that we would receive some comfort from their youth pastor. Because I had questions like my brother was in and out of gangs, my brother was a troubled kid. And I wondered, man, did he make it? Did he make it to heaven? He was at every altar call. So-called altar call. Did he make it? And I asked that. Finally, after the woman had said everything she had to say, I went to this pastor and I said, ma'am, I just want to know this. My brother went to every altar call up here. Did he make it to heaven? And then she threw her list of, okay, well, you said he was in and out of gangs? Yeah, okay. And he did drugs now and then? Yeah. And he had tattoos? I have tattoos. Some of you had tattoos. That was the measure that this woman, the standard this woman was measuring my brother against. Matt Shea has a grip of tattoos over here, right? I mean, really, that's the measure? And when she, at the end of that, said, after measuring him, he probably didn't make it. Man, that caught me off guard because that sent me on a downward spiral of drugs and alcohol because I said, man, if that's the standard, then I'm jacked. I can't make it. Sorry. Okay, That's what that does. Rules-based religion, you can never measure up to it, no matter how good you are. You just can't. And so I fight tenaciously against that religious spirit. Now, people, at least one couple, is leaving the church over this. Well, I'm sad about that. But I'm unrelenting on this. And I convey this to you. I'm not going to go anymore on this. I convey this to you because it's important for you to know, as members of this church family, what it is that myself and my staff and our leadership team are all about. And in solidarity, you see many of them wearing their hats today. I want this place to be a place of grace. A lot of churches say, oh, come as you are, but they don't really mean it. I want us to really, really, really mean it. Jesus said this, Matthew 11, verses 28 through 30. Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me, work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. And that's all I have to say about that.